Now, quite a few of you guys asked me about this. We had Courage at Marcel F1 asking, could you please explain the Ferrari appeal and why it was rejected? And this is really quite a simple one to look at, although the outcome maybe isn't quite as obvious as we would have expected. So in essence, whilst Ferrari were busy mucking up their pit stops by pitting too early and then coming out on cold slicks and wasting a lap either stuck behind slow traffic or just struggling to get temperature into their slicks, and Red Bull stayed out that extra lap or so on intermediates, effectively overcutting the Ferraris. Afterwards, the Red Bulls then pitted for their slicks, and they were hurrying to get out of the pits. Now, from what we can deduce, both Red Bulls potentially crossed the pit exit line on their way out of the pits. That's the solid yellow line that you're not supposed to blend across. You're supposed to stay to one side of that, and in Monaco's case, that's the right-hand side of that, until the yellow line ends, and that's obviously to prevent you from joining into traffic and being dangerous when there are other cars coming past at full racing speed. Now, we were actually running live on board with Verstappen on the live international feed when he looked to get a little bit sideways and potentially run across that yellow line. And I tweeted at the time that I thought that was a pretty obvious pit lane exit violation. Now, Ferrari pretty sensibly put in an appeal after the race because they thought, obviously, that they could get maybe a position or two back from this if Perez and Verstappen had infringed this rule. Now, here's where it gets a little bit more tricky. The onboard footage we've got doesn't clearly show Verstappen crossing that line, and we haven't seen any footage of Perez. So we've only really got Verstappen's to go with. What you see is he exits the pits on cold slicks whilst the track is damp, gets on the power a little bit too hard on the exit, or maybe just carries a bit too much speed at the pit exit, gets sideways, corrects, turns into the slide, but that obviously walks him wide. It walks him to the left. And at the very least, we can see from the onboard that he drives onto the yellow line. And we've also got some outside shots, some still pretty grainy shots from the car behind, showing what looks like him either driving directly on top of the yellow line or potentially slightly past it. Now, in the race director's notes for this weekend, it was very specifically written that in accordance with Chapter 4, Section 5 of Appendix L to the ISC, drivers must keep to the right of the solid yellow line at the pit exit when leaving the pits and stay to the right of this line until it finishes after turn 1. Now, that would tend to mean you're not allowed to even touch the line. So it shouldn't really be an issue whether or not the car was fully past the line, whether one of his tyres was past the edge of the yellow line and effectively over the top of the next piece of bare tarmac, asphalt. It should just be enough that he touches the yellow line and it should be a penalty. But just to further confuse this, as Crofty points out on Twitter, the FIA's own sporting code states that drivers must not cross the line. Now, that seems to be a bit of a contradiction with the race director's notes for the weekend, which effectively implies that they're not even allowed to touch the line. So we have two conflicting FIA rules going on here, which is not surprising, but very frustrating because this shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't have a race director making a specific note which contradicts or at least makes it confusing to judge what should be a pretty black and white rule. So section 18.1 of the FIA Sporting Code says, no part of any car leaving the pits may cross this line. Now, crossing the line would imply that they are allowed to touch it, they're just not allowed to cross it and appear out the other side. And that's where it's unclear whether or not Verstappen has done this. You can try and judge for yourselves from the grainy images we have here, but this is really the best we've got. And I believe this is why the stewards ruled in Red Bull's favour, because they couldn't say for absolutely certain whether or not Verstappen had fully crossed the yellow line. In my opinion, I think it looks like he has, and it looked on initial viewing from the live pictures that he had. And Lando Norris was penalised from a similar onboard camera view where it was impossible to tell if he definitely crossed the line at Barcelona and had his qualifying lap deleted for being over a white line. And they had similar kinds of evidence for that. So again, potential inconsistency from FIA stewards, but we've kind of grown to expect this over the last couple of years, unfortunately.